I remember the exact weight of our kitchen table the night I first suspected something was wrong. Not the way it looked, the dented corner, the coffee stains like small moons, but the way its surface hummed under my palms as if it were a drum tuned to a frequency only I could hear. It was ordinary in every sense. Mismatched chairs, a salt shaker with a chip, a calendar with our initials scribbled on anniversaries. And yet the table felt like the last honest thing in a house that was beginning to lie. My name is Mark. I was 38 when my marriage ended, or rather, when it stopped being mine. We'd been married 9 years. Anna taught at the university. I sold software to companies that claimed productivity was a moral imperative. We had a home loan that didn't make us rich, a rescue dog named Lenny, and a rhythm of lives that fit together like pieces of a cheap, beloved puzzle. People told us we were the easy couple, you know, the kind you mention in a neighborhood with a smile. We had the dinners, the vacations, the polite fights about thermostats. That was the life the table knew. If there is a single crime in the book of domestic living, it is this. You grow used to a pattern until it becomes the only proof that love exists. You start to measure affection in receipts and shared chores. The thefts happen slowly, a text unanswered here, a missing toothbrush there, until one day you look up and the house is full of things that used to belong to 2 people and now belong to 1. It began with small absences. Anna started staying at the office later. She claimed committees and visiting lecturers and grading marathons. I believed her with the blind faith of someone who wants to preserve a neat world. When she was home, she seemed distracted, a laugh that didn't take, hands moving as if turning pages of a half-formed thought. She put the dog outside more often, which she'd never done before. Lenny, who used to jump on her at 4 in the morning for breakfast, learned to wait. There were little signs, the kind you read about in articles with headlines that say, "How to Notice Infidelity." Lipstick on a glass, a new perfume in a place you never saw it before, a calendar entry that didn't match the story told. I ignored the first dozen of them because ignoring is cheaper than admitting. Denial is a warm coat. I buttoned it and kept walking. The night everything changed, I was making tea in that kitchen while Anna was supposed to be at a departmental reception. It was raining, so the windows blurred the streetlights into yellow-smeared stars. The house smelled of chamomile and rain. My phone buzzed, a text from her. "Running late. Stay safe." I smiled, tucked the phone into my pocket and finished the kettle. I remember thinking how small my happiness had become, how simply knowing she'd sent that text made the night softer. Then my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize first. Then the same text service pinged, this time with a link to a photo. A friend's post tagged Anna, her face in a crowd laughing, with a man I didn't know. His arm slung easily around her shoulders. The caption read, "Great night with the team." The room went quiet like someone had shut off a radio. The tea kettle hissed like a quiet machine from another life. I stared at the photo and began to catalogue the small things I'd missed. The man's hand on her shoulder, the angle of her head tilted toward him the way she'd leaned toward me on our honeymoon, when we were still learning how to be 2 people in the world. For a while after that I floated. I was the husband of a woman who had somehow become comfortable with an image of herself I wasn't part of. I don't know when curiosity curdled into obsession, but I know the sounds it made. The quiet of checking her phone when her back was turned. The sick little thrill of searching a name and finding a LinkedIn profile that made sense of a dozen previously meaningless absences. His name was Jonah. That afternoon, a name that had been nothing became a chain. Jonah, project lead, visiting lecturer, works late. His face filled my screen in a dozen places. Faculty events, casual coffees, a man with eyes that looked as if they were designed to listen. He smiled like someone who collects people's attention and arranges it into a chorus. I did not confront her. I invented elaborate selves that were righteous and calm. I told myself I would gather evidence so that when the time came, I would act with decency. Decency is such an elegant word until you are living it. It makes you patient and cowardly in the same breath. I catalogued receipts, photos, times, the smell of unfamiliar soap on towels. I sat alone at the table and mapped her absences like constellations. One night I followed her. I drove in my old, borrowed patience like some priest performing a ritual of proof. She met Jonah in a cafe near the river. They greeted each other with a small, private warmth. They lingered over coffee. At one point, Jonah put his hand on hers, a touch that might have been innocent in another life. But in ours, it felt like an incision. I could have left then. I did not. Instead, I watched them through the rain-dark window, and whatever illusions I'd been keeping then evaporated like steam from a lukewarm cup. The man with a listening face had become the other life she had scrolled to in the middle of the night. The life that required a different cup of tea, a different kind of attention. The soft cruelty of someone pronouncing your name with new vowels. When I finally confronted her, I did it with the terrible, careful patience of someone who has rehearsed a death scene. I remember the way she looked at me as if she'd been waiting for the moment someone else's eyes would find the truth and end the slow betrayal with the violent lace of discovery. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, which sounds simple and righteous until the breath leaves you like a bad confession. "I didn't want to hurt you," she answered. She did not look away. She folded her hands like someone who had practiced humility for a long time. It started as companionship. Jonah understood my work. He listened. I felt found. "I thought we were enough," I said, honest in my stammered smallness. How pathetic that sentence felt. "You are," she said. "You were." The tense hung between us like a guillotine in slow motion. "But we're not the same people, Mark. Maybe we never were." That was the word that hurt. Never. The accusation was not a bullet. It was an erasing. We had been a story she was rewriting without me. I tried to be the good husband after that. I called therapists. We spoke to counselors. We went through exercises that felt like crosswords with missing letters. She agreed to end things with Jonah, in theory. But endings in the small hours of human things are fragile. People sign them because the light is bright and the coffee is hot, and then in the shadows they change the locks of their own resolutions. The months that followed were a slow and ugly study in human cruelty. It is one thing to have your partner fall in love with someone else. It is another to be convinced you are losing your mind along the way. I found my keys in the freezer twice. Emails I had written simply vanished from my outbox. A playlist I'd made of songs we used to love sometimes turned up with different songs. Music that was intimate in a cadence I did not understand. Once, a photograph I had taken on a trip, one where Anna looked at me like I was the only man on earth, was missing from its frame. I found it weeks later under our bed, creased. When you catalogue these small betrayals as evidence, you begin to suspect that the betrayal is not only about bodies and hearts, but about sanity. I used to read thrillers and think that gaslighting was a fiction, a dramatic plot device. Then I experienced the soft, orchestrated doubt of someone you trust, shaping your reality into something brittle and unreliable. "Maybe you're tired," Anna said once when I accused her of moving things. "You've been under pressure, Mark." "Or maybe you're hiding things," I answered, the accusation a thin line between hope and fury. She sighed, the sound of someone coaching a child. "I'm not trying to make you feel crazy, but we need to stop looking for monsters under every bed." "You told me Jonah was a colleague," I said, flat. "You said he was visiting for a lecture." "He was," she replied. "He is. It doesn't have to mean—" I remember looking at her then, like I was peering at unfamiliar handwriting. The face was hers, but something in the eyes was curated to a new audience. There was a kindness that was public and an intimacy that was private, and the two had evidently learned to use different languages. The last straw, if there can be such a thing when you collect grievances like a miser collects coins, was the day I found the small black box. It was in the pocket of a coat she hadn't worn in months. I wasn't looking for anything. I was cleaning out, which is how grief sometimes comes dressed as domesticity. The box contained a folded photograph of Anna and Jonah caught in some private mirth, their heads close like two conspirators, and a small note in Jonah's handwriting. "For when the world gets loud, and you need a voice." There wasn't just evidence in that box. There was a philosophy, the deliberate practice of making a life elsewhere while keeping me as the domestic scaffolding. It was as if our marriage had been a stage and she had slipped off to practice a scene that excluded me. I carried the box to the living room and sat on the couch until the rain outside subsided. I imagined all the ways this could end, with rage, with tearful apologies, with legal counsel, with a long, reasonable divorce arranged around custody and property. But the reality of betrayal does not follow scripts. It mutates, becomes rogue, a virus of small, insistent pains. I confronted them together once, in a public, theatrical way. I sat across from Jonah in a cafe with thrift shop lighting and the smell of baked goods. He was younger than I expected. He had the kind of hands that looked like they could hold attention like water. Anna sat beside him with the polite, awkward smile of someone asked to play witness for a truth she'd already been telling herself. "What are you doing to my life?" I asked him. Jonah looked at me for a long time, like he was calculating the contour of my face. "We're just two people who found something," he said. "It's not personal, it's life." "Not personal?" I repeated. "You sat with my wife while I passed out at the office because of overtime. You were the voice she turned to." He shrugged like anyone might shrug off a weather report. "Mark, relationships evolve. You can fight it or you can accept it. I found that acceptance is the spine of their positions. They elected to make themselves reasonable while I was asked to be the monstrous one for wanting what married men are supposed to want. Fidelity, truth, the everyday smallness of being seen. After that meeting, I came home and sat at the kitchen table and calmed myself like someone learning to breathe again. The room felt the same as always, except for me. My hands seemed foreign in my lap. I tried to think of a pragmatic next step. Pack a bag, call a lawyer, we can give up the house. But logic is sterile in the face of losing the person who knows the exact shape of your laugh. There were dark nights I cannot tell you about without sounding like a cliché, and there were ordinary days that scalded, the ones where she would make a meal and slide it across to me like trying to hand over peace in a takeaway container. She would say, "This is for you," and then sit in a silence as if the food were a contract. I ate it. I chewed. I looked at Jonah's photograph in the pocket of a coat I had to fold, as if folding could imitate forgetting. We tried therapy. The counselor asked about childhoods and attachment styles and gave us exercises that felt like self-help aphorisms. At first it was promising because it provided a structure. Then it became another place where we rehearsed the same sentences without reaching the point where sentences become actions. She would tell the therapist she loved me, and I would tell her I wanted to believe her, and then we would walk out and trample the hope with our feet, like men who walk past flowers and fail to notice their fragrance. Sometimes I would wake in the night and imagine the future like a film I'd never wanted to direct. Our house sold, the dog with a new owner, custody arrangements, long forms. I would invent little cruelties I thought might punish the betrayal without me being directly violent. Tell my friends, public humiliation, social exile. The most dangerous things are those you rehearse in private. Rehearsal makes them possible. One October night the stage tilted. Anna came to bed late. Her hair smelled faintly of another perfume. She crawled in beside me, and I watched her sleep like someone seeing oceans on a map. Familiar lines, but no water. I reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and she flinched as if my touch weighed a brick. I woke up in the morning with the taste of metal in my mouth and the unbearable clarity that the house was no longer a thing we shared, but the setting for a story she was acting out. The following week, Jonah left town. He said he had a fellowship, a chance at a project abroad, a career thing. He sent a late-night text to Anna. "This could be it." She wrote back, "I'll wait." That text scabbed something raw inside me. To wait is a vow. To write "I'll wait" meant she had made a vow elsewhere, to a man who promised her something I had failed to keep. She did wait. She waited until Jonah boarded a plane. She waited in our bed and in our kitchen and in our days, and flinched at my touches with a practiced economy of affection that had the precision of a trained actor. Then, 9 days after Jonah's departure, she packed her bag. No note, no confrontation. She put her clothes in a suitcase like someone preparing for a trip without telling the travel companion. I came home early to find the suitcase at the foot of our bed and a message on the table. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." There was a neatness to the note that hurt, not a flurry of guilt, but a clean line, a tidy cutting. Some people leave messes so you know they were real. She left a paper that could be folded and put away. It made me feel like the residue of our life had been treated like a thing someone on their way out would pick up. Keys, photos, the dog's leash. I stood in the doorway the entire night and watched the house as dawn broke like a rumor. Lenny curled at my feet and whined when I tried to sleep. I tried calling her, heterogeneous pleas that became rote and hollow. The voicemail she'd left me 9 months earlier, "Don't worry, babe, just late," seemed like an ill-placed relic. To be abandoned is its own kind of violence. There are fewer bangs and more absences. The sound is not dramatic, but inimical. The quiet phone that never rings, the chair that sits empty until you remove it from the table. People say time heals, and they are right in the sense that time erodes sharper edges. But time does not make the bruises go away. They become a pale geography on a chest you learn to move around. I tried to reach out. I thought perhaps the human thing to do was to bargain, to be suitably devastated and ask for answers. Her friends were careful and small in their kindness. Some said she was lost and not ready for a map. Others said she had found herself. Jonah sent me an email once, a carefully neutral missive that expressed regret for any hurt caused and hope for honest futures. There is a corporate tone to apology when it's drafted by someone who sells ideas for a living. 2 months later, I ran into Anna downtown. She had changed in that way people do when they exit an entire storyline. Lighter, maybe, or fragile with possibility. She looked at me with a complicated mixture of pity and resolve. We sat on a bench while a child chased a squirrel and the city marched past with its unbothered indifference. She explained in gentle tones how the connection with Jonah had been a mirror for parts of her that were brittle and ignored. She said she had loved me once and that love had not been the problem. The problem was the way we failed each other over years of small omissions. She regretted the hurt, she said, but she could not stay. Her voice was real, her resolve was real. I listened like a man who was being told the ending of a play he had been starring in. When she left, she closed the door with the soft, unostentatious click of finality. No drama, no raised voices. The real hurt, I realized, is not in the argument, but in the quiet. The person who walked away did not slam the door. She simply stepped over the threshold and did not return. I tried to rebuild my life in the months that followed. I gave Lenny a friendlier walk schedule. I made coffee at 10 instead of 7. I stopped using the side of the bed that had a faint smell of her. I dated poorly. The world was full of people, but a world that had been hollowed by someone you once trusted is hard to populate. At night, I sometimes dream she knocks at the door and we reconcile with the effortless kindness of young lovers. I wake angry at the dreamer who misleads me. Other nights, I dream of Jonah's face as a quiet menace, a cipher for all the small things I could not provide. Sometimes, in a lullaby of regret, I ask the dark, was it my fault? Can any adult relationship survive all the minute betrayals of attention? I am aware of the absurdity of self-blame, but also of its usefulness. Guilt sharpens the self, makes you more honest, perhaps, than any therapist ever could. The table still stands. I eat there sometimes, alone, and sometimes with a friend who tells me stories that are not mine. The salt shaker is chipped in the same place. The calendar hangs with the same scribbled initials. The ordinary things keep being ordinary, and maybe that is the point. Life is built of small, steady acts. It is the slow endurance of those acts that is more important than any sudden tragedy. I do not know if Anna made the right choice. She became, in my life, the secret source of a loneliness I will carry for years. I know what it did to me. I learned to notice things I had once ignored. I learned that love is sometimes a collection of habits that must be tended, not a banner you raise and forget behind your back. I learned that people can love more than one person at once in different languages, and that sometimes one of those languages is not translated for the other person in time. The ending, if there is one, is not cinematic. There was no falling glass or courtroom drama in my life. There was a small daily grief and the slow reclaiming of myself. The tragic part of this story is that we can be honest about being human and still cause each other unbearable pain. The most tragic thing is how ordinary it all remained. Bills paid, dog fed, messages left unread. Sometimes in the quiet hours, I find myself back at the window, looking out at a rainy night and thinking of the way her head rested against his shoulder in a photograph I once found on a phone. I touch the scar on my palm from when I tried to save a burned dinner long ago and laugh softly at what I used to think were the important things. If this sounds bitter, maybe it is, a little. If it sounds resigned, maybe it is that too. Grief affords both. Life proceeds in the thin spaces between one person's leaving and another's possible arrival. There is comfort in small rituals and dignity in making tea for no one and drinking it anyway. I still sit at that table sometimes and let my hands feel the wood. The table remembers because a table always remembers. The house keeps its stains and its dented corners and the small ghosts of the years you thought would always be enough. I set my cup down and watch the steam vanish into the air. The warmth is immediate and honest. For now, that will have to do.